Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'suk b'divrei Torah. Varev na Adonai Eloheinu divrei Toratcha b'finu b'fiyamcha beit Yisrael. V'niyeh anachnu b'tzetzenu b'tzetzeimcha beit Yisrael. Kulanu yodea shemecha v'lomdei Toratecha lishma. Baruch atah Adonai lomdei Torah l'mo Yisrael.
Amen.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'cha banu mikol hamim v'natan lanu Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay. All right. So just one or two ideas quickly. That the Vilna Gaon has a commentary on Mishlei, where it talks about metal upon metal, a companion to his friend. So what does it mean, metal upon metal, a companion to his friend? So the Vilna Gaon states that basically it says metal, not wood, against each other, because it's talking about two friends or a group of friends learning against each other. Meaning what it should be is people of similar levels. You've got different relationships. You've got a student-teacher relationship, and you've got what we have all together, which is similar intellect, similar background, similar lines of reasoning, etc. And when two friends learn together, it's compared to metal against metal, meaning what they should do is that they should sharpen each other with similar sort of levels. Firstly, the Vilna Gaon says it's not metal against wood or copper or anything like that. It's the similar sort of metal structures, meaning that if you're intellectually strong or you, from a teaching point of view or experiential point of view, far stronger than your companion, then obviously that's more of a teaching student position. And that's healthy as long as the teacher doesn't obliterate the student, in the sense that the whole purpose of a teacher is to actually draw out the student's ability. Because how to improve your game of tennis is to play against better players, but not if the intention of the person that you're playing against is super competitive in nature and all they want to do is smash you. I mean, the fact that they're better and they can smash you, that's not any indication of anything other than an ego stroke. The entire point of playing with somebody better is that person helps to grow you and helps to grow their own skill set as a teacher. And the best is when friends learn with friends that are both very similar, and you need to be sharp in order for this to be a useful exercise. And Rabbi Ran Khan brings this commentary in the Vilna Gaon, and he says there's two things that you need generally to work well in Torah or any sort of discourse, and that is to have a proper lines of reasoning. That's number one. Meaning, like Gavin asked a question yesterday, and so did Kevin. Arthur had a lot on his mind, but Arthur has from time to time too. And those lines had genuine merit. I mean, one of the questions that Gavin asked, which I thought was very good, is he gave lines of reasoning about how you could not really find a person muad, and you would have to find cases more where the animal is muad. So that was a proper line of reasoning. Then what I had to do is then bring proofs to either prove or disprove his line of reasoning. The fact of it is there were proofs for his line of reasoning. So you've got Sephora, which is logic, and you've got proofs, which is scriptural in nature. So on that, we're going to get started with a couple of halachas quickly, where we finished yesterday, because it was the holiday season and you all look like you're in the mood for a holiday, although who's leaving anyway? We were discussing Tefillah Haderech, which is the prayer that you say when you travel, and the distance, etc. We already discussed the halachas of it. The only thing of it is it says that if you drive, if you're actually driving, you shouldn't say it when you're driving. I mean, that goes without saying for two reasons. Either A, you'll write the car off, or B, you're not going to have kavanah when you're davening. So you should either get someone else to say it on your behalf and listen while you're driving in Zomemim. But the correct thing to do is to say it and just pull over to the side for over a minute, where you can say it once you're on the outskirts of the city. But obviously you pull over where it's safe. If you pull over in Johannesburg to say a prayer, you could get hijacked. So the thing of it is you have to wait till you're at the petrol station. Things to remember before you go. The Mishnah Berurah and the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch bring down a number of things to remember on a journey. Obviously, always take your talis and tefillin, even if it's a day trip and you've davened. What could happen is that you could get stuck in a location without your taliesin to fill in, even if you're only planning a single day trip and you've done davening for that morning. Take bread in case you don't arrive exactly as you planned, and provisions. Don't eat a lot while traveling, as in case you need the loo and there aren't facilities around. I'm not being vulgar, that's what it says. Travel in the daytime, leave in the morning, and arrive before sunset. I can tell you, to drive on national South African roads when it's dark, just to get a couple of hours more of the day, is not a clever scenario. I mean, potholes aren't great when you're going at a speed. When you can't see them, they're deadly. Um, and it says also, ask a brocha from a big sage before you go. Give tzedakah before you go. Okay. So let's just start the Gemara now that we've ended on that particular note. Firstly, I want to say, Arthur, thank you very, very much for putting in that effort for storing the shiurim on the hard drive. Guys, we're 4 daf away from finishing the second chapter. That's all. No, 3 daf. We're 3 daf away from finishing the second chapter. Then we've done the second chapter, so we're making good progress. I know it doesn't feel like it so much, but we really are. And you're getting a very deep understanding of everything, which is great. All right. So we were talking about Eidim Zomemim, right? So we said if 2 witnesses testified against him concerning the first occurrence. This is on daf 24a3.
Okay.
So there are 2 witnesses, because you always need 2 witnesses for each and every case. So what's happening is they're coming to court and they're bringing, it appears that there are 3 different legal cases against the person in order to make the person muad. And it's but we're actually saying that the ox is muad. Why? Because in order for it to make the person muad, it would have to be on 3 successive, or not even successive, it doesn't have to be consecutive, but on 3 separate days that the person would have to be warned to habituate him in order to look after his animal. Here we're saying that the guy came back from vacation, for example, he's come back to a disaster, and 3 people have taken him to court on the same day, and they've got 3 different separate court cases of goring. It's not one case. Each case is heard separately, okay? So you've got 2 witnesses that constitute a case. That's the first occurrence. Then you've got 2 different witnesses testifying against him concerning the second occurrence. And then a further 2 different witnesses testifying against him concerning the third occurrence. So here we have 3 testimonies, right? But they are one testimony as regards to the hazama penalty. We already discussed what hazama is. Just to recap, hazama is the process where we, if we're going to make the witnesses false and conspiring, we call them, the process of hazama is where we make them conspiring witnesses. Kev, are you falling asleep? Kev, are you asleep?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, guys, just try a little bit. I mean, all of you look bored. And
No, I'm
asleep.
awake. I learned the spot, so I'm enjoying it.
All right.
That's the process, Damon, hazama. The process of...
Yes. The process of discrediting conspiring witnesses.
Exactly. It is on
and all I'm saying is that, Kevin, you might have viewed the witnesses in a different province to where they actually caught the offense. You don't have to know anything about the offense. All we're saying is that you saw them having tea at a cafe in Cape Town.
Yeah.
Where in fact, they testified against some case in Johannesburg. That's all you need. You don't even need to know what case they were claiming to have seen. All right. So that's the process of hazama. So why do you need the process of hazama here? Is because we're differentiating between 2 different things. Again, there's 2 different payments here. The mu'at would be full payment from choice property, and the half payment would be from the body of the animal. So those are your T leniencies. Now, the minute you have to have 3 sets of witnesses, in order to make the witnesses culpable of the full mu'at penalty, you have to have actually 3 sets of witnesses conspiring. Because the minute only one of the sets of witnesses are conspiring and the other 2 are genuine, let me give you a case. The first 2 sets of witnesses are genuine, and the third set don't like this particular individual on trial. And they want to use this as an opportunity to double whammy him. What do I mean double whammy him? to accuse him of a payment of a false goring, as well as making them the third offense, so that they have to turn around and the owner of the ox has to now pay full payment for the third occurrence. Again, this is going according to Rava, because the rabbis say you after the third offense you warned, and then from the fourth offense you liable. But why is it going according to Rava? For the principle of proving Eidim Zomemim, it's always easier to bring 3 sets of false witnesses than 4. So on the theory side, it's a little bit easier to go according to Rava here. Does that make sense, guys? So what we're saying is, if the first set of witnesses are found to be Zomemim, we have 2 remaining testimonies, and the owner is not liable to full damages, and the witnesses that are found to be Zomemim are not liable for conspiring him, liable to full damages. But what does it mean? They're still liable for the respective half damages. Because if your first case accuses somebody of goring, then what you intended to do to that person of make them liable to half damages from the body of the animal, they would have to pay. It's seen as an individual case in and of its own. The second set of witnesses that have conspired to do the same things, the second set would have to pay for their own accusations against this innocent defendant, right? But you can't make those 2 sets of witnesses also share the cost for the full muad payment of the third offense, because the third offense would either in this case be genuine, okay, which means that if it happened on successive days, the first 2 witnesses had no idea there'd be a third set of witnesses. But you do have a case where the third set of witnesses are genuine, right? But the first 2 sets could only make the third set liable to full damages if their testimony came. So if their testimony came and the third set was genuine, what would happen in that particular case is, again, the first case of Zomemim intended to get him to pay, so they would pay half damages from the body of the animal for what they intended to do. The second set of witnesses would have to do the same thing. And in this case, if the third set was genuine, that there's full payment damages, that we would obviously in that case, if we could circumvent it in time, make sure that the third set would now go back to a status of a first occurrence. Does that make sense? What I mean by first occurrence? Meaning the
Yes,
first
cool.
2 have been cancelled out. So if the first 2 have been cancelled out, then they don't exist.
So like a first scoring, only the first time. Is that what you
Yes,
mean?
so in other words, what I'm saying is the first 2 cases, now have been struck off the court roll. So the third case is not a muad case anymore. Why is the third case not a muad case anymore? Because the first 2 sets of witnesses for 2 separate cases have come to be known as conspiring witnesses. So the first set of witnesses, tam payment. Second set of witnesses, tam payment, because that's what they intended to do to their victim. Now, you can't prove that they intended unless you have evidence for a muad payment in the third case, if the third case is either genuine, or the fact of it was found out prior to that period of time, where then the third case becomes almost the first real case, at which the owner then, that third case, which is now a genuine case, would have to pay half damages from the body of the goring animal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, if they discover, can I ask you a question? If they,
Sure.
I think I know the answer, but just don't double check. If the first 2 are only discovered after the third one is Moad and he's paid from choice property, and then they see afterwards that the first 2 were actually false witnesses, what happens then? Becomes trickier.
Okay, so let's apply some of the principles. So you're saying that the first 2 are discovered to be false only after they pay for only after he's paid for the in other words, the victim paid 2 false tam payments and 1 full muad payment for the third event, but only the third event is genuine. and the first two are
Correct.
false. Is that what you're
Correct.
saying? In that particular case, as far as I know, because the case has already transpired, we wouldn't have a case where the Eidim Zomemim pay the reciprocal payment, for the simple reason is, as we explained, that at the point at which the trial is over, they don't get the reciprocal payment. They don't have that chance of kapora. So unfortunately, then the intended victim would pay for 2 tam payments and a full payment for the third muad.
Shame. Yeah, no, you're right. It's tough.
But then it's mina shamayim, because Hashem
yeah.
could have stopped it at any time. Okay.
100%.
All right. So let's just so if 2 witnesses testified against him concerning the first occurrence, and 2 different witnesses testified him concerning the second occurrence, and 2 different ones testified him concerning the third occurrence, we have here 3 testimonies, but they are one testimony as regards to the hazama penalty. Okay, which means if the first set is found to be Zomemim, we have here 2 remaining testimonies, and the owner is not liable to full damages, and they, the witnesses found to be Zomemim, are not liable to conspiring him to make full damages. In other words, what are they liable for? For the tam payment damages. Kevin, do you have any questions on what I've just said?
No.
Okay. So in other words, if we have 2 testimonies remaining, we can't obligate the first set of witnesses for full payment, okay, at all, because the minute they struck off the roll, we can only apply that reciprocal benefit of the tam, payment of the tam, for the first set of witnesses, right? If the second set as well is found to be Zomemim, we have 1 testimony remaining, and the owner is not liable to full damages, right? So then the 2 first sets of witnesses only have to pay the tam portion of what they intended to do to their victim. Fine. If the third set as well is found to be Zomemim, now here we're talking about a case of not where the third set is a genuine case, but that the court has found that all 3 sets are found to be conspiring witnesses. Then what happens is basically the first 2 cases pay tam, and the all 3 of the witnesses share the muad payment of the third case. Okay, so let's just take a financial figure here, right? Or let's just take some similar case. So for the first, so everybody shares the total costs. So what we do is as follows, is if all 3 are made to be Eidim Zomemim, right? We take, and remember the leniency is from the body of the animal. So what we do is if the third occurrence is muad, not the first 2 occurrences are muad, then we don't make the third witnesses that are Eidim Zomemim pay the full amount of the muad payment, reciprocal payment, because they wouldn't have had successful testimony without the first 2 sets of conspiring witnesses. Does that make sense? So they all pay the half payment of the tam portion, and then what would happen is that they share the muad payment for the third offense from choice property. So say the first goring was 80 zuz, right? For the tam, and it said he gored his ox, and that particular ox was a puny ox of 20 zuz, okay? Then the tam payment would be 40 zuz to a maximum of the body of the 20 zuz first ox. So that would be the first set of witnesses that have to pay the intended victim. The second set had a fat ox, and they said, no, there was a goring offense, and in that case, there was maybe 100 zuz of damage, but this ox was like 300 zuz. So even if you made the half payment 50 zuz, because that ox was a heavy ox, the ox that attacked, in that particular case, you would be in for 50 zuz. So far we're in for 70 zuz, and the last offense cost 100 zuz. So in that particular case, Arthur's just disappeared.
Damon, you said 300 is only in for 50.
No. What I was saying is as follows. Okay, there's let me just clear it up. So there's two leniencies with the time payment. Your ox attacks my ox, right? Now, if you pay on the body of your attacking ox, so if your ox is extremely thin, not only do you pay half payment damages from the body of the animal, but you also pay based on the weight of your ox. So if it was a muad payment that your ox had been forewarned, and you did 300 zuz worth of damages to my ox, right? And then in that particular case, your ox is not forewarned and it's time. You pay 150, but you pay it only on the body of your attacking animal, on the gufa of the attacking animal, because you're selling that animal and paying the financial difference in certain cases, like in the pit. But in this case, if you owe me 150 zuz worth of damages, but your attacking ox is only worth 120 zuz, that's the extent of what you would have to pay. Does that make sense? So there's two leniencies. You pay half payment with the value of the attacking ox. Kev, you're not sure? It's okay if you're not sure.
If I have it in writing, if I have it in hard copy, I'll understand it better. You know what I mean?
All right. Let's simplify the second.
You know what I mean?
Let me simplify.
But I don't want you to. If I see it, then I'll understand. I mean, I do understand. It just makes it to make it easier for all of us. I think if we had like an example.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
No. Right. Let me just make it simple. Let me just make it simple. Let's not take a case where two animals gore each other. Your ox gores my ox. Your ox is worth, in terms of weight and body, etc. Yours is a massive ox, and your ox is worth 200 zuz, for example. Okay, and my ox is also massive, and my ox is worth 300 zuz. Okay, and you've done damage in terms of my ox. Just say you killed my ox outright, killed it. Okay, and you've cost me 200 zuz, and your ox is worth 300 zuz. What did we say your ox was worth? No, my ox was worth 300 zuz, and your ox was worth
200.
200 zuz. So then, if your ox was muad and full warned, you'd have to pay me 300 zuz from choice property. Now that your ox is paid, damaged and killed my ox worth 300 zuz, then technically for a time payment, you only owe me 150 zuz.
Yeah.
You only owe me 150 zuz. But you would pay the 450 zuz because your attacking ox was a heavy set 200 zuz ox. If your ox happened to be a puny ox, okay, then what happens is you pay to the limitation of the value of the aggressive animal, because you're actually selling your animal to pay for the damages.
Okay, but I thought it's the same applies to a big ox. If it's a strong one.
No. I'm saying you're using your ox that did the attacking.
The value of your ox, yes. The value of the attacking ox.
Yes. So I'm saying you've got two leniencies here. Any time payment is half the actual damages.
Yes,
and the second leniency is if your ox is a puny ox, you pay to either that cash value of the puny ox, limited, or you pay the value, or you sell that ox in lieu of the payment. So what I'm saying is here, say you owe me 200 zuz worth of damages, just straight. You owe me 200 zuz worth of damages for a muad ox.
Yeah.
For a muad ox.
Killed your ox with 200. The value of yours is 200.
Doesn't matter. Even
the value of the damages is 200.
So the injury or death is 200 zuz. Your ox is tame. Your ox is tame. So therefore, you would only owe the first leniency applies half payment damages of 100.
Okay.
So when you pay half payment damages of 100 zuz, we then say if your ox is even more puny, like it's only worth 75 zuz, you would pay to a maximum of the value of your attacking ox, which would be 75 zuz. If your ox is quite a heavy ox at 120 zuz, you would pay the maximum of the half payment damages of 100 zuz. So two leniencies kick in. The first leniency that always kicks in is half payment damage. That's your
Yeah,
first.
okay.
Your second leniency that kicks in is the value of the attacking animal. So if you have a very light animal or not an expensive animal that happens to have done the damage, it's your lucky day, because you pay the maximum value of that puny little ox that attacked my ox, which might be less than the half payment damage. Does that make sense?
Okay, I thought...
It makes perfect sense then.
Yeah. I thought it applied to... Because then I thought it applied to both the puny ox and the big ox.
Yeah, so all we're saying is here, listen.
So only the puny one is a separate leniency.
Correct. Yeah. So in other words,
okay.
If your attacking ox happens to be heavy, you still get the half payment leniency, but your ox is too heavy to take advantage of that weight of that ox or the value of the ox being less than the half payment damage generally.
So if it was a big ox, but if it did damage of 400 and it was only worth 200, it pays 200.
Yeah. Well, then you'd pay 200. But if your ox happened to be worth less than the body of the ox worth less than 200,
you pay what the value is. That's it.
Well, you could say, listen, either keep my ox, it's worth 150 zuz, or I'll give you 150 zuz worth of cash, and I like my ox. But that's your two limitations that kick in. So the first one is always half payment. Second one, the gufa of the animal, the body of the animal. So all we're saying here, back to the daf, is that if it's found that all three sets are conspiring witnesses, okay, then what happens is they have to share the cost, which means what would happen is the first two cases would pay the tam payment, and the third Eidim Zomemim would not have to pay the burden of the muad payment on his own, because he couldn't have made the animal muad as a false set of witnesses without the other two sets of witnesses. So they share the muad cost between all the witnesses, because you need three sets of witnesses in order to make the intended victim payable to full damages on the third offense, according to Rabbah.
So Dan,
sorry, mate. All you would do is, I think mathematically, is you would just pool all the costs together and then probably divide it by 3. I think that would be the most reasonable way of doing it. Is to take,
they all conspired, so they'll do it anyway.
They're all conspired. That's exactly it. What did you say?
Now, I wanted to find out, with the witnesses, do you mean it's got to be 2 or more people per group, or it can't be one person doing it? It's got to be 2 or more.
Correct.
In each group.
Correct.
Okay.
In a Jewish court, each case has to have 2 sets of witnesses.
Okay, so the first 2, if they're found guilty, found conspiring, and the other 2 aren't, it's a situation where they're responsible not for the muad, but for the tam. The second group found with the first and second, again, not for the muad, but only for the tam. But if all 3 are found guilty, then it's for the muad, and they all share it.
Okay, but it's only muad for the third offense. So what would happen?
Okay.
It's a bit of a mess in terms of how to work out the arithmetic.
Okay.
But obviously, they deem a certain amount for the first false scoring. So intended to cost them X, they add that to the total for case 1. Case 2 intended to cost him Y, so they add that together. Then on the third muad case, it would be none of the 2 leniencies of half payment damages on the body of the animal, so they add the total of what the third occurrence was. They tally that up and they divide it by 3.
Okay, another question is, with the goring, is it 3 different animals that he's goring on the 3 different days, or is it the same animal that he's gored?
Excellent question. Excellent question. So the reality is 3 separate animals would not make it muad. Why?
Oh, really?
Because again, we're studying the habitual nature of an animal. Okay. So Arthur's asking a good question. I'll tell you why it's a good question. If you want to say that the person is muad, Arthur's saying then maybe it can occur with different animals, because the person now has been negligent in watching his animal. But the caveat here is as follows: in order to make the person, even the person muad, the person is actually just forewarned about a particular aggressive animal, not a variety of animals. In other words, we have to give him 3 warnings to habituate him to get to look after his one rogue animal. But the minute it's a different animal,
I'm
and I know where you've got that
I'm not
confusion.
saying that. I'm saying the same animal attacks 3 different animals. The same.
No, that's fine. Your question wasn't
That's what I
that.
want. Oh, okay, sorry. That's what I meant. I meant the same bull attacks 3 different bulls of those 6 people, whatever it is. Is it that, or is it
Absolutely.
just one bull attacking one bull 3 times?
No.
Okay.
Anytime an animal displays aggressive behavior on a
Obviously.
consistent basis, it doesn't matter if it attacks children, different creatures, or anything like that, that is a dangerous animal. And therefore, that animal itself is now muad, and the owner has to be forewarned. So, in that particular case, when all 3 witnesses are Eidim Zomemim, what would happen then? Kevin Shaw clicked. What would happen then is that, or his head banging. He's got a background in metal.
It's the same Lahavdil, yeah.
Lahavdil. What would happen then is that the first case would be tallied up of what the false witnesses intended to cost the victim. Second case tallied up of what the false witnesses would intend to cost the victim. Third case muad what the third set of witnesses intended to cost the victim. But because all those set of witnesses really intended to make that person pay heavy in the third offense, so all those totals are added together, they're divided by 3, and each set of witnesses would have to pay 1/3.
Wow.
Okay, it's gone.
And now I have another question. Okay.
Sure.
That ox attacked 3 different oxes, right?
Yeah.
And the other oxes were, let's say, 300 zuz each, so it's 900 zuz. But his ox is only 300 zuz. He can only pay up to 450 out of the 3 oxes.
Good
Or how does
question.
that
So that's exactly why it's not part of one case.
Okay.
They're 3 separate legal cases. Because when
Okay.
you're looking at it in one legal case, you
Okay.
say, all right, what is the situation? You've got attacking ox, victim ox. Or victim. It could be a victim cow or a victim sheep, whatever it is. Victim, is the victim dead or injured?
Okay.
How many offenses does this attacking animal create? What is the expenses due? Is this animal a tame animal or is it forewarned? If it's tame, these are the 2 leniencies. Half payment within the body of the animal. Fine. This is the amount. Case 1 is completed. Fine. Then case 2, they do the same thing in case 3. At the point, this is the tricky part, Gavin, is at what point do they make the person pay? Because is the case concluded upon payment, or when they work out that the third set is conspiring and worked out the other 2, is the payment written in the books and at that point the verdict is given, or is the verdict only made when the person only physically pays? I don't know.
Okay. Another question I have is if let's say his ox attacks the first day and it's a half payment because it's time, and it's the second day and the half day is time and he pays, and the third time it becomes muad. The muad's from choice property. So what does he do about the payment of the other 2? Because now it's become, does it go backwards and say, okay, he's now got to pay them all full payment? Let's say it wasn't conspiring.
So good question. So what we learned is in order for this to occur, there has to be a discussion where we said 2 things have to happen.
Okay.
The animal's owner has to come to court, and there has to be a court appearance. If there's a court appearance without the owner, or if the owner is warned but it's not within the confines of court, it doesn't constitute a warning, and therefore there can't be a muad case.
Okay.
So warning would be considered within the owner warned in an official court scenario.
Okay.
And only obviously after the third offense would it become muad. In the interim, he would pay for the first and second offense.
Okay.
And this is exactly where the case comes from, because what we did discuss is if we looked at Exodus Shmot chapter 21, verse 29, it said, if he was warned and he does not guard his animal, but the owner is apprised of his muad actions in a way that does not enable him to guard it from committing future attacks, then this Torah's condition has not been fulfilled and he would not have to pay the muad penalty. So what we're saying is here is that it also protects the owner to a certain extent.
Okay.
Is that each case is done separately, and that's why it would be very difficult to prove if you want to make a person muad to have conspiring witnesses. Why? Because if the court appearances were on separate days, in order to make the person muad, and not on separate gorings only, not only on separate gorings, then how do you know that the witnesses are conspiring? Because the first, second say, I don't know other people to come and testify. I only sought to make him make half payment damages. Yes, we were false witnesses, but only to make him half payment. I didn't know there'd be other witnesses afterwards. Because how do you know who's going to rock up tomorrow or the next day? So, but if you're trying to make the animal muad, where the owner only has to be warned officially once, in other words, in one day, on 3 separate events and not in successive days, or separate days. When I say successive, that's wrong. It doesn't have to be one after the other. It just has to be separate. But if the owner doesn't have to be warned on separate days and can be warned on one day 3 times, but the animal has to have created the word, the 3 gorings, according to Rabbi Yehuda, on 3 separate days, then in that case, you can have Eidim Zomemim because it's more likely that conspiring witnesses would be in the same court setting. You can't have it on different days and be able to necessarily track as easily who's false witnesses, unless they pre-conspired before and had coffee together, or something like that.
Okay.
So all it's saying is as follows: if the third set as well is found to be Zomemim, then all 3 sets of witnesses are liable for conspiring to the owner to make the damages. So, and regarding a case such as this is stated, and you shall do unto him as he plans, etc. So what does it mean? Why this particular verse of Bava Kamma does it keep bringing in makot and the hazana process and Eidim Zomemim? This is one of the questions that Rashi and Tosfot want to ask. It's very interesting. So the source of it is Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 19. And according to the Torah's Chaim, he explains that this case is a little bit different. Because if the first 2 groups of Zomemim are being held liable for a consequence of full damages for the third goring, it's not a direct subject of their testimony, but it's just subsequently a byproduct. What are we saying? We can say that the witnesses can't turn around and say, no, I only intended to make him tam, and you can only convict me of what I intended to do to the victim, because even though his particular case, he did make the person tam, if he was found to be conspiring along with the other set of witnesses, his intention by his first testimony or by their first testimonies and their second was an intention to have a group of people make the intended victim muad. And therefore he can't get out of it, or the first 2 sets of witnesses or second 2 sets can't get out of it and say, you can only make me make the tam payment, because without their testimony, you could never have had a muad payment for the third offense. And so even if they say that wasn't the intention, the byproduct of their false testimony came to convict the intended victim on a muad payment. So whatever they say the intention was, the actual testimony contributed to making that person muad. So they can't use it as an excuse.
Can I ask a question? Sorry, because I missed this in when we did Sanhedrin as well. I didn't cover Eidim Zomemim properly. I want to ask you something. How come there's no penalty? I mean, the fact that you have to just repay muad, or you have to repay half payment that you, if it's time, it's not a deterrent. I mean, you may as well take a chance. All you have to do
it is a penalty. I'll prove it to you. I'll prove it to you. We learned this before.
It seems to be compensation.
No, understood. Let me prove it to you in logic. Gavin, I'll prove to you it's a penalty. This was a whole discussion. I go to trial with you, not me. I don't want to use the term me. Okay, so a person Shimon goes to make sure Reuven is convicted of 300 zuz worth of damage. Now, the court finds out about his shenanigans before this happens. Okay? So Reuven didn't suffer a 300 zuz loss. So it's not compensation. Shimon actually now has to pay 300 zuz as a penalty, but Reuven didn't suffer because the court found out before the intended victim had to pay. So that's the definition of a penalty. It's not to compensate the person because we're saying after the person is convicted and it's then found out that they're Eidim Zomemim, then that payment is not paid back. So that would be compensation. The very fact that it's a penalty is because he intended to do it for his victim, but his victim never suffered that cost.
Yeah, no, you're right. Okay. 100%. So it is a penalty. It's very clever though. But the penalty always equals the compensation amount though.
There was no amount paid.
I know.
There can only be a
compensation. But I'm saying that's what's confusing.
Okay, but you have a good valid point. Now let me play Hashem's advocate another way. Why would you say it's a compensation? Because it's not. It doesn't have two other factors that a penalty has. Let's look at the other two factors. Factor number one: it's not a set amount, so that would look like a compensation. Whatever you intended to do to your victim is done to you. Now, what is a penalty? A penalty, let's just take theft, is if you pay back the compensatory amount and then you pay a further exact same amount as a penalty. You steal 100 zuz, you pay back 200. 100 zuz goes back as compensation. The other 100 zuz is a penalty. So you pay 200 zuz on 100 zuz you took. Whether that penalty goes to the court or goes to the victim, I'm not sure. But then what we say there is a penalty generally supersedes the amount at which cost the victim. That's number one. And in this seems like compensation in a way because it's the same at what you intended to do to the victim. But the proof that it's a penalty is that it was not done to the victim. So you're not compensating him for his loss. You tried to do it, but you didn't. You tried to do it. So that's not compensation because he's not getting it back. Another proof it's not compensation. Eidim Zomemim falsely testify and get a person put to death. Once he gets put to death, they're not given the reciprocal death penalty. It's only if they were caught halfway through the trial being Eidim Zomemim that those false conspiring witnesses are given the death penalty, Kevin. And since that's the case, they never, that person never suffered the death penalty. So it's not compensation. It's not compensation. He didn't suffer the death. They're getting the death penalty now as a penalty because it's not giving him anything back. Further to which, the reason why it's called a death penalty is because you never bring back the life of the person you've killed, ever. How's that compensation? What, the person comes back from the dead? That's a penalty.
No, I agree. Thank you.
Further to which is that if you come, Eidim Zomemim, only if you run away to another court and say you were Eidim Zomemim, then you don't have to pay the reciprocal penalty. That's the one example given. In other words, that Eidim Zomemim isn't, I don't think, done to you. If you quickly run away before you get convicted as Eidim Zomemim to another court and say you did wrong, I think in that case, that penalty is waived, but that proves it's a penalty. So there's arguments for the fact that it would seem like compensation as well. Does that make sense? But in the end of the day, it's a penalty. All right. Any other questions?